Welcome back.
Welcome back to Hear Us Out. I'm Renee.
I'm Kyrie.
And again, I want to say thank you to our longtime subscribers who've been with us for 49, going on to our 50th episode. And for our new listeners and new subscribers, thank you for finding us to hear us out.
Thank you. And on the last episode, we began our discussion on Dune Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
We read the first, I think,
50,
four,
49.
five chapters, I think.
Yeah, well, I guess, just about the first 50 pages. I was just bringing it up into pages because they're not necessarily
because I think
labeled
this
as
time,
chapters.
I think this time we read 4 chapters again, so I think we might be going 4 chapters at a time.
Right.
But okay, let's just jump right in. Last time we ended with Paul recognizing the sacrifice that he's going to have to make, recognizing that to bring the jihad to an end, to bring this to an end, he's going to have to sacrifice Chani. Chani's going to have to die. And, he's very shaken by this, but he has come to his own Freeman decision about it all. And he knows, that he's going to have to sacrifice his one love of his life. He doesn't want to do it, but he knows it's something that he has to. And but in this part, we see the conspiracy actually begin. We see things start to take a form because all of our conspirators are in action in our upcoming in these upcoming parts. And it starts with Scytale, the face dancer, and the Benny Tylex representative of our conspirators arriving at the house of a former death commando,
right,
of the Freeman, named Farouk.
Right.
Farouk.
Right.
And he's in this cul-de-sac of the Arakeen, of the city Arakeen, and he's outside. Scytale is outside waiting, and he's very nervous about just being out in the open, and not to mention that he's taken on the visage of Duncan Idaho. As a face dancer, he can do that. He can just change his face, and he's changed his face into that of Duncan Idaho. And he's there outside waiting, and Farouk answers the door. He goes to the door, and they have this little back and forth.
Right.
All right. And really it's just this conversation to let Farouk know
that this
is someone who's in on the conspiracy. And it's agonizingly slow for Scytale because, he's out in the open and he doesn't know if this is prolonged on purpose, if there's some danger, if there's some message in it. But no, it's just Farouk, taking his time with the whole thing. And this is the one Freeman that we see who's actually in on the conspiracy against Paul. And throughout this particular chapter, we start to see why Farouk has decided to join this conspiracy against Paul Muad'Dib. And he talks about how things have changed for the Freeman people. Because Farouk was he was an old man.
Yes.
Even back then when Paul first stepped in on the scene, he was an old man, and now he's witnessed this change being inflicted on his people, and he is not happy about it at all. He talks about how the spice orgies that they used to have, which we saw in Dune, when Jessica became a Reverend Mother, a fully realized Reverend Mother, when Jessica and Aaliyah became a fully realized Reverend Mother. But Farouk talks about how those spice orgies used to be a mingling of souls, and how it used to be this spiritual awakening for the whole tribe, and now it's been replaced with feasts, and they have these slave girls and stuff like that, and it's not a mingling of souls; it's just debauchery, right? And he does not like that, and he also doesn't like how how I guess Paul has to operate his society now. How that people have been made into his messengers.
Right.
Right. He talks about they used to be for lower animals,
Mhm.
and if you can recall back in the first Dune, how they used to send these messages to one another with these bats.
Mhm.
And I think they were like these modified bats had like a something in their heads or something, and you would be able to speak to the bats, and the bat would record
Right.
your message
Mhm.
fully, and then the bat would fly off to whomever the message was for, and then whomever got the message
Right.
would say a little passcode or passphrase
Mhm.
to the bat, then
Right. And
it'll relay the message that
right.
way,
Mhm.
and that used to be for the lower animals. But
Mhm.
now Paul has people,
Mhm.
who are serving this purpose, and that seems just completely antithetical to Farak's worldview. And Sidetail is there, and I find it funny because Sidetail is there, and he's like, well, you gotta be like, well, that this is normal standard operation for any empire
Right.
to encode their means of messaging one another, and that I think that one of the things he says like because they're carrying revenue information. And Scitel thinks to himself like more than one empire has fallen when the people learn the true extent of
Then,
their
right.
empire's wealth.
Mhm.
You know, and so he's talking about what Paul's kind of doing
Yeah.
normal
Yeah. He's doing
empire
empire things.
things.
Right.
Yeah, but that is completely antithetical
Mhm.
to to the to the Freeman way of life, and I
Mhm.
think that just goes to show that the Freemen, at least there was a very populous contingent amongst Freemen that didn't really know what
What
they
they were
were
getting. That's
creating,
right.
what
Right.
they were getting
Mhm.
into. All they kind of just caught up in the religious fervor of it
Right.
all. And Farak himself talks about how he never really
Stood.
understood
Mhm.
Paul and all the things that was said about Paul.
Mhm.
They said that the moon was his soul and he was the coming
Right.
of he was their prophet and he like
I
I don't
don't.
know
What's
about
that?
all
Like I
that.
don't understand
I
that.
don't understand. Yeah, literally, I think that's
Mhm.
what I said. I
Yeah.
never
Understood.
understood.
Uh huh.
But the thing that really made him get on board with Paul Muad'Dib was he wanted to see an ocean.
Right. The sea, because he
The sea
mentions
was
right.
such an inconceivable
Conceivable.
thing to him
Mhm.
that like he could understand
A river.
like a river
Right. He
or a
mentions that.
lake
Right. Mhm.
or something, but the
Idea
idea
of
that
a
there's this giant body of water
water. Mhm.
that you can't see the edge of that just goes on forever
Mhm.
like was so inconceivable
Conceivable.
to him that that's why he
He joined
signed
in. Right.
that's
That's why
why he
he.
signed up, that's
Mhm.
why he joined in, because he wanted to see an ocean.
Mhm.
And he
Yeah.
does on one of the planets that he led the Freeman to victory on. They see an ocean,
Ocean. Mhm.
and all of his other Freeman, brethren who are in his, this platoon, you can
Mhm.
say, they're too afraid to even go near the ocean.
Right.
They're like, on the beach, just stop right by the shore.
Mhm.
They can't go in.
Mhm.
Farak is the one
One
Freeman who is
that
able
goes
to
into the
muster
water.
enough
Right.
courage to go inside the water. He goes and he bathes in the water, and it's he talks about it, and it's very baptismal
Right.
for him.
Mhm.
He goes and he drinks the seawater, and even though it makes him sick.
Sick. Right.
He was sick for days on
Mhm.
end, but he just had to. He drunk the seawater, and he was just immersed himself in it. I think he literally talks about Mother Chaos,
Right.
about
Mhm.
how he communed with Mother
Mhm.
Chaos, and how I've mentioned many a times before about the Chaos Comp, about how these Chaos Mothers are always signified by the deep sea,
Mhm.
by the ocean, and he himself uh, communed with Mother Chaos, and it gave him what he feels a deeper knowledge, a deeper insight, something even beyond Paul.
Right.
that something that Paul may not be able to understand, in Farouk's own words. And Scytale is somewhat moved by the story of this man and his religious awakening that he had in this ocean. And he said that when he immersed himself in the sea, when he came out, he knew that he could no longer be a part of the jihad. Right. He could no longer be a part of it. And I find it interesting, mainly because he talks about how when he was in the ocean, he saw like a dead body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right.
He saw a dead body of, one of the foreigners or somebody on this planet, who died as a result of the coming of the Freeman. And he sees a burned log, that
was still sort of smoking.
That was still smoldering, and from the victory in this battle. And he's for once the detritus of war becomes the detritus of war. Mm-hmm. Like he sees the true cost of all of this, and he can no longer justify it to himself anymore. And he sees how they've been changed by all of this, and he can no longer be party to it. Mm-hmm. And he's giving Scytale, while he's telling this story, he's giving him details about Paul's stronghold. About how there's like only one way in for the ornithopters, for the flying machines, and how, he's always flanked.
Right, with his
administrators
and massive
bureaucratic
entourage.
Of all these administrators, priests, and people who's always following him around. And so Scytale is, while he's getting the information, he's getting the inside detail of Paul's stronghold. He's also been given this message, because the entire time this is happening, Farouk's son, is in the room playing, music. Mm-hmm. And in the music is this message. Mm-hmm. This distant message, right? And it's the same type of message that Paul's, people are carrying, the same type of message that the bats will be carrying. But it has been imprinted on his subconscious. He doesn't actively know this message. Mm-hmm. He just knows that he's just been given this information through the music. And someone is going to be able to get that from him with a passcode or a passphrase or something. He doesn't consciously know it. And he knows that he's been given this information. And he's also been introduced to his son's, you could say, wife, in a sense.
Yeah.
Who is Othium, who's the next door neighbor, his next door neighbor's daughter. Mm-hmm. And his son, Farouk's son, is blind. Was blinded by his on his escapades from the jihad. And usually back in the day,
with the freedmen,
he would have been killed. He would have been cast out into the desert because he's blind and like we can't do anything for you. Right. But that's not how things operate anymore. They don't have to, to get rid of these people anymore. But there's still this stigma around him because he's blind and he's like half a man now, and he can't really, so nobody feels good, giving him their children, like allowing him to have a relationship with any of their children. So he has this wife who's, strung out on this drugs on Samuda, who doesn't even know what's going on, who's just there. And once she's been introduced, and once Scytale has all the information that he needs, he kills Farouk, and he kills the son. Mm-hmm. And he takes on the guise of Farouk, and he kind of leads the young lady out through the back door. Mm-hmm. And he talks about how because one of the philosophies of the faith dances is that they always have to leave an opening for their victims to escape. Mm-hmm. Right? And he talks about how Farouk had to have recognized the danger in him, in him actually being there. And so he feels justified that he gave them an opportunity to recognize the danger that they were in. And he kills them like subtly with this needle, this poison needle, right? That paralyzes them and works the poison into their bloodstream and kills them. and whom and this woman is going to play some type of role in the
Mm-hmm.
conspiracy. It's going to play some type of thing. So yeah, so that was the first part that we read, and the second chapter that we read is Paul's council meeting.
Yes.
And so yeah, this is the one that we actually want to read out. This one little chapter here,
Mm-hmm.
because this is the one that we talked about, that we alluded to in our preamble,
Yeah.
in our discussion.
And dealing with the Constitution and things of that that
Mm-hmm.
nature. And here it is. We see how Paul, operates. How Airline is not. She is not up to speed with this
Well,
particular
we
group.
see that because let's just read.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Empires do not suffer emptiness of purpose at the time of their creation. It is when they have become established that aims are lost and replaced by vague ritual.
I love that.
Of course,
Another
and
little
I
quote.
actually wrote that. So,
Mm-hmm.
words of Muad'Dib.
Mm-hmm.
It was going to be a bad session, this meeting of the Imperial Council, Aliyah realized. She sensed contention gathering force, storing up energy, the way Irulan refused to look at Chani, Stilgar's nervous shuffling of papers, the scowls Paul directed at Corba the Quizzer. She seated herself at the end of the golden council table so she could look out the balcony windows at the dusty light of the afternoon.
And this is the first time we're being introduced to
To Aliyah.
Aaliyah in the story so far, and Korba. Even though we've heard Korba kind of alluded to before in the history of Bronso's history, that Korba is a leader amongst the Quizzarat,
Mm-hmm.
and that he's gonna betray the house of Muad'Dib.
Mm-hmm. And Aliyah is Paul's sister,
Yeah,
and she's maybe about 15 or 16
at
years
this
old
point,
at
yeah,
this point.
it's been
And
12 years. So
yeah,
yeah,
it's been 12 years. And Aliyah is not, she's not the little sister in this,
yeah,
in any sense of the word.
she is a reverend. She's a full fledged reverend mother.
Mother, right.
She's been a full ever since before she was born.
Right.
Because when
In the
when
first book is when Jessica.
underwent the spice trial,
Mm-hmm.
and she had to the poison and everything,
Mm-hmm.
she was pregnant with Aaliyah,
Aliyah. Mm-hmm.
and Aaliyah became a receptacle for all of the memories just as
Right.
much as Jessica was.
Mm-hmm.
But and I think it's in this particular chapter where it said, don't assume that what Jessica became through her experience
That's right.
is
There's
what Aaliyah
Aliyah.
became. They
Right.
became two separate figures,
Mm-hmm.
two separate beings,
Right.
beings of two separate perspectives,
Right.
of two.
Yeah, Aaliyah is her own person. Right.
She's
not
something
just,
else. She's
right.
not
She's
a reverend
not,
mother.
that's right.
She's something more than a reverend mother.
Right.
So yeah.
Corba, interrupted by her entrance, went on with something he'd been saying to Paul. What I mean, my lord, is that there aren't as many gods as once there were. Aaliyah laughed, throwing her head back. The movement dropped the black hood of her abba robe. Her features lay exposed, blue in blue, spice eyes. Her mother's oval face beneath a cap of bronze hair, small nose, mouth wide and generous. Corvus' cheeks went almost the color of his orange robe. He glared at Aaliyah, an angry gnome, bald and fuming. Do you know what's being said about your brother? He demanded. I know what's being said about your Quizzarat, Aaliyah countered. You're not divines, you're God spies. Corva glanced at Paul for support, said, We are sent by the writ of Muad'Dib, that he shall know the truth of his people, and they shall know the truth of him. Spies, Aaliyah said. Corba pursed his lips in injured silence. Paul looked at his sister, wondering why she provoked Corba. Abruptly, he saw that Aaliyah had passed into womanhood, beautiful with the first blazing innocence of youth. He found himself surprised that he hadn't noticed it until this moment. She was 15, almost 16, a reverend mother without motherhood, virgin priestess, object of fearful veneration for the superstitious masses, Aaliyah of the knife. This is not the time or place for your sister's levity, Arlan said. Paul ignored her, nodded to Corba. The square's full of pilgrims. Go out and lead their prayer. But they expect you, my lord, Corbus said. Put on your turban, Paul said. They'll never know at this distance. Ermelin's smothered irritation at being ignored watched Corbo arise to obey. She had the sudden disquieting thought that Edrix might not hide her action from Aaliyah. What do we really know of the sister, she wondered. Chani, hands tightly clasped in her lap, glanced across the table at Stilgar, her uncle, Paul's minister of state. Did the old freeman Naib ever long for the simpler life of his desert siege? She wondered. Stilgar's black hair, she noted, had begun to gray at the edges, but his eyes beneath heavy brows remained far seeing. It was the eagle stare of the wild, and his beard still carried the catch tube indentation of life in a steel suit.
So, and this is yes our first time seeing Stilgar in the story so far. And Stilgar was the leader of Siege to Bird. He was the one who, you could say, allowed Paul access. He inducted him
Right into the
the
freeman
Freeman culture, into the Freeman ways, and he was the one who really allowed for Paul to become Muad'Dib.
Right. Yeah, because I think it was a particular fight or stance that they had, and that Paul was able to,
Yeah,
I guess, show his grit with
he never had a
Stilgar.
fight with
No,
Stilgar.
no, it wasn't a fight, but he was able to show
Well, yeah,
something.
he the fight with Jameis.
Yes, he showed himself, and that's when.
Yeah, that
Right.
and when he refused to fight Stilgar, when he refused to
Right.
kill Stilgar, is when
Right.
So yeah,
Made nervous by Chinese attention, Stilgar looked around the council chamber. His gaze fell on the balcony window and Corba standing outside. Corba raised outstretched arms for the benediction, and a trick of the afternoon sun cast a red halo onto the window behind him. For a moment, Stilgar saw the court Quizara as a figure crucified on a fiery wheel. Corba lowered his arms, destroyed the illusion, but Stilgar remained shaken by it. His thoughts went in angry frustration at the fawning supplicants waiting in the audience hall, and to the hopeful pomp which surrounded Muad'Dib's throne. Convening with the emperor, one hoped for a fault in him to find mistakes, Stilgar thought. He felt this might be sacrilege, but wanted it anyway. Distant crowd murmuring into the chamber as Corba returned. The balcony door thumped into its seal behind him, shutting off the sound. Paul's gaze followed the Quizera. Corba took his seat at, at Paul's left, dark features composed, eyes glazed by fanaticism. He enjoyed that moment of religious power. The Spirit's presence has been invoked, he said. Thank the Lord for that, Aaliyah said.
I love that.
Yes, Corba's lips went white.
I said Corva is like he's such a fanatic.
Right?
And he's punch drunk on just a little bit
Of
Paul's power.
power.
He gets just the tiniest, most minute taste of Paul's status, and he comes back completely punch drunk,
Right.
and he's like, the
spirit
the
of the
spirit has been called. And Aaliyah just completely cuts him down immediately, oh yeah, thank God for that.
Yeah.
Just completely. He's very obviously power hungry, and you know that he just wants any opportunity to just
he's
to
next
be
to
in
it,
control, to be
right.
in
He's
power.
next to the power, and so he thinks just being next to it gives it to him. Right,
He wants that power. He wants it so badly.
Right. Again, Paul studied his sister, wondered at her motives, her innocence maxed deception. He told himself she'd come out of the same Bene Gesserit breeding program as he had. What had the Kwisatz Haderach genetics produced in her? There was always that mysterious difference. She'd been an embryo in the womb when her mother had survived the raw melange poison. Mother and unborn daughter had become Reverend Mother simultaneously, but simultaneously didn't carry identity. Of the experience, Aaliyah said that in one terrifying instant she had awakened to consciousness, her memory absorbing the uncounted other lives which her mother was assimilating. I became my mother and all the others, she said. I was unformed, unborn, but I became an old woman then and there. Sensing his thoughts on her, Aaliyah smiled at Paul. His expression softened. How could anyone react to Cobra with other than cynical humor? He asked himself. What is more ridiculous than a death commando transformed into a priest? Stilgar tapped his papers. If my line permits, he said, these are matters urgent and dire. The two-power treaty? Paul asked. The Guild maintains that we must sign this treaty without knowing the precise location of the two-power intent, Stilgar said. Intente, Stilgar
In
said.
time.
Intent?
Something like that.
Okay. There's some support from Lancegarod's delegates. What pressure have you brought to bear? Arlon asked. Those pressures which my emperor has designated for this enterprise, Stilgar said. The stiff formality of his reply contained all his disapproval of the princess consort. My lord and husband, Irulan said, turning to Paul, forcing him to acknowledge her, emphasizing the tutelar difference in front of Chani, Paul thought, is a weakness. In such moments, he shared Stilgar's dislike for Irulan, but sympathy tempered his emotions. What was Irulan but a Bene Gesserit pawn? Yes, Paul said. Irulan stared at him. If you withheld their melange, Chani shook her head in dissent. We tread with caution, Paul said. Two power remains the place of sanctuary for defeated great houses. It symbolizes a last resort, a final place of safety for all our subjects. Exposing the sanctuary makes it vulnerable. If they can hide people, they can hide other things, Stilgar rumbled. An army, perhaps. Or the beginning of melange culture, which you don't back people into a corner, Aaliyah said. Not if you want them to remain peaceful. Ruefully, she saw that she'd been drawn into the contention which she'd foreseen. So we spent 10 years of negotiating for nothing? Erlang said. None of my brother's actions is for nothing, Aaliyah said. Erlang picked up a scribe, gripped it with white knuckle intensity. Paul saw her martial emotional control in the Bene Gesserit way, the penetrating inward stare, deep breathing. He could almost hear her repeating the litany. Presently, she said, what have we gained? We've kept the guild off balance, Chinese said. We want to avoid a showdown confrontation with our enemies, Aaliyah said. We have no special desire to kill them. There's enough butchery going on under the Atreides banner. She feels it too, Paul thought. Strange. What a sense of compelling responsibility they both felt for the brawling, adulterous universe with its ecstasies of tranquility and wild motion. Must we protect them from themselves? He wondered. They play with nothingness every moment. Empty lies, empty words. They ask too much of me. His thought felt tight and full. How many moments would he lose? What sons? What dreams? What is worth the price his vision had revealed? Who would ask the living of some far distant future who would say to them, but for Muad'Dib, you would not be here.
Paul feeling the full weight of his responsibilities, of the full consequences of everything that has happened.
And I highlighted this because it just the weight of it all. That you would put your life's decision in someone else's hands and ask them to make the choice and decision that you refuse to make for yourself. And then when he makes that decision for you, the weight and the responsibility of decision falls on him. And I'm like, this sounds too familiar.
But no one. This started before Paul was even born.
Mm-hmm.
the moment when he was born is when everything was crystallized and became unavoidable in a sense. You know, so on the same token, that you can say that he took their responsibility away.
Mm-hmm.
The moment he had his vision, that one vision that prescribed everything, that the universe was going to be. It trapped them all in his dream, his vision
Mm-hmm.
of the jihad, of this death. After that, there was no more choice. After
Yeah.
that, there was nothing that can be done.
Mm-hmm.
All that anyone can do is hope that Paul can see them through it.
But for Muad'Dib, would you not be here? I'm like, that last line was just, you know, it's it's taking the responsibility out of you and your decisions. You know, anybody but God.
Mm.
It's always someone else that's leading you versus your own decisions and your own acts. Okay,
Mhm.
let me go. Denying them their melange would solve nothing, Chinese said. So the guild's navigators will lose their ability to see into time space. Your sisters of the Bene Gesserit will lose their truth sense. Some people might die before their time. Communication will break down. Who could be blamed? They wouldn't let it come to that, Arlan said. Wouldn't they? Chinese asked. Why not? Who could blame the guild? They'd be helpless. Demonstrably so. We'll sign the treaty as it stands, Paul said. My lord, Stilgar said, concentrating on his hands. There is a question in our minds. Yes, Paul gave the old freeman his full attention. You have certain powers, Stilgar said. Can you not locate the Entente despite the guild? Powers, Paul thought. Stilgar couldn't just say, your precinct? Can't you trace a path in the future that leads to two power? Paul looked at the golden surface of the table. Always the same problem. How could he express the limits of the inexpressible? Should he speak of fragmentation, the natural destiny of all power? How could someone who never experienced the spice change the precious conceive an awareness containing no localized spacetime, no personal image vector, no associated sensory captives? He looked at Aaliyah, found her attention on Arline. Aaliyah sensed this movement, glanced at him, nodded toward Airline. Ah, yes. Any answer they gave will find its way into one of Arline's special reports to the Bene Gesserit. They never gave up seeking an answer to their Kwisatz Haderach. Stilgar, though, deserved an answer of some kind. For that matter, so did Arline. The initiated tried to conceive of prescience as obeying a natural law, Paul said. He steepled his hands in front of him. But it'd be just as correct to say it's heaven speaking to us, that being able to read the future is a harmonious act of man's being. In other words, prediction is a natural consequence in the wave of the present. It wears the guise of nature, you see. But such powers cannot be used from an attitude that prestates aims and purposes. Does a ship caught in the wave say where it's going? There's no cause and effect in the oracle. Causes become occasions of convections and confluences, places where the currents meet. Except in prescience, you feel your being with concepts repugnant to the intellect. Your intellectual consciousness, therefore, rejects them. In rejecting, intellect becomes a part of the process and is subjugated.
Mm. Let me try to explain. Let me try to explain what Paul has just said there, because that's a very, you could say, Eastern
Mm-hmm.
point of view on things.
Mm-hmm.
He is pretty much denouncing cause and effect. He's saying that I can't. This isn't an intentional power. This isn't a thing that I can just do.
Mm-hmm.
This is an awareness. It is like you say, it is a thing of nature. There is no cause and effect. There is no
Mm-hmm.
I do this and then it does that. everything exists as a consequence of now, as the present. He said, think of yourself as a ship in the ocean, right? And as the ship is passing through that water, the waves that it creates, that's the past, right? And the prow of the ship, the very front where it's going, that's the future. These things all exist as a consequence of now. And everything is all simultaneous, all continuous and moving and shifting. And since nothing exists as a result of the other thing, everything exists continuously and absolutely, then there is no cause, no effect. And your mind rejects it. The part of you that tries to make sense of it rejects, the chaos of it all. And once that happens, your intellect recoils and is subjugated. It becomes, dominated by chaos itself. So there is this isn't a power that I can use.
Right.
It isn't a weapon at my disposal. It is a thing that is of itself.
Tough. And you cannot do it. Still gonna ask. Still going away on it.
So Stilgar is very matter of fact.
Facts, right.
About all of this.
Right.
He
can't use the power or not. What was going on?
Because Stilgar is purely looking for an answer. That the answer that Paul just gave was for Irulan. Was for her and for the Bene Gesserit who's going to, no doubt hear of what he just said.
That's right.
Because
Irulan is taking her notes.
But Stilgar is just looking for an yes or no.
No. Right.
So Paul just gave this long-winded, very, detailed answer, which was yes and no.
Right.
But Stilgar is like yes or no.
Yes or no.
Can you do it or not?
Yes. Can you be more definitive? Were I to seek two powers with prescience, Paul said, speaking directly to Irulan, this might hide two powers.
See, the intent obfuscates. If you use it intentionally, it may end up hiding the thing that you're actually looking for, or even worse.
Yeah.
Because the last time Paul actually looked toward the future, it was the jihad.
Right.
And it's the nature versus nurture thing. Did he see this future or did he create it?
Right.
Right. Well, whether he just saw it or he created it, the very act of seeing it set all of this in motion. So if he were to rely or use that power that way, there's no telling what other dream, what other trap he may trap us in, what other vision we may have no choice but to live out. So he doesn't actively want to use his power that way, because if he does, who knows what he might create. These things, like I said, it's chaos. It is not an intentional thing. It creates in and of itself. And it is, you could say, responding toward the human action, toward the human will. And it tends toward a particular thing. So he doesn't want to use his power that way. And especially since if he does, and he does, find out where, Tupac is, it could create something beyond, anyone's imagining. So he's just he doesn't
want to go there.
He doesn't want to go there.
Right. Chaos. Irulan protested. It has no consistency. I did say it obeys no natural law, Paul said. Then there are limits to what you can see or do with your powers? Irulan asked. Before Paul could answer, Aaliyah said, Dear Irulan, prescience has no limits. Not consistent. Consistency isn't a necessary aspect of the universe. What he said.
Shut up.
How can my brother give you explicit information about the limits of something which has no limits? The boundaries escape the intellect.
Are you not listening? It's not that he can't see Tupac. It's not that he can't.
Right.
It's all there. It's all in his vision. but to actively
Look.
look forward creates ripples that may hide it and may end up creating something that creating another jihad, creating another inescapable dream. So but it's not that he can't. There is no limit. He's omniscient. He
Right.
sees all.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea of intentionally marshaling this power ends up creating something that could subsume everything else.
Yeah.
And like the jihad.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Right.
But Irulan is only thinking about maybe he doesn't
Yeah.
know of the conspiracy. There is some
Yeah.
limit to
Right.
his powers. Like you're completely
You
missing
just
the point here.
yes. Anyway, that was a nasty thing for Aaliyah to do. Paul thought it would alarm Iran, who had such a careful consciousness, so dependent upon values derived from precise limits. His gaze went to Korba, who sat in pose of religious reverie, listening with the soul. How could the Khazaric use this exchange? More religious mystery, something to evoke awe? No doubt. Then you signed a treaty in its present form. Stilgar asked. Paul smiled. The issue of the oracle by Stilgar's judgment has been closed. Stilgar aimed only at victory, not at discovering truth. Peace, justice, and a sound coinage. These anchored Stilgar's universe. He wanted something visible and real, a signature on a treaty. I'll sign it, Paul said. Stilgar took up a fresh folder. The latest communication from our field commanders in Sector Ixin speaks of agitation for a constitution. The old freebie glanced at Chinese, who shrugged. Irulan had closed her eyes and put both hands to her forehead in mnemonic impressment. Opened her eyes, studied Paul intently. The Ixian Confederacy offers submission, Stilgar said, but their negotiators question the amount of imperial tax which they want a legal limit to my imperial will, Paul said. Who will govern me? The Lanzarad or Chon? Stilgar removed from the folder a note of Instroy paper. One of our agents sent this memorandum from a caucus of the Chon minority. He read the cipher in a flat voice. The throne must be stopped in its attempt at a power monopoly. We must tell the truth about the Atreides, how he maneuvers behind the triple sham of Lanzarad legislation, religious sanction, and bureaucratic efficiency. He pushed the note back into the folder. A constitution, Johnny murmured. All glanced at her, back to Stilgar. Thus the jihad falters, Paul thought, but not soon enough to save me. The thought produced emotional tensions. He remembered his earliest visions of the jihad to be the terror and the revulsion he experienced. Now, of course, he knew visions of greater terrors. He had lived with the real violence. He had seen his freemen, charged with mystical strengths, sweep all before them in the religious war. The jihad gained a new perspective. It was finite, of course, a brief spasm when measured against eternity, but beyond lay horrors to overshadow anything in the past. All in my name, Paul thought. Perhaps they could be given the form of a constitution, Johnny suggested. It needn't be actual. Deceit is a tool of statecraft, Caroline agreed. There are limits to power, as those who put their hopes in a constitution always discover, Paul said.
I love it. I love it.
We haven't even gotten to the good part yet.
Yeah, but I'm like, because that's the whole thing,
Mhm.
is that at least here in America,
Right.
the Constitution was created as a way to limit the power
Right.
of the government. But power has limitations.
Mhm.
So the Constitution, in and of itself, is a limited document.
Right.
And it's
It can only do
ineffective
that's right.
in actually limiting the power of the government.
Right.
Because the Constitution is limited.
Okay.
The feedback.
It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Y'all want
So
you want limits.
So you want
limits. That's what you want. That's
what limits on power. You create a constitution that tries to limit my power.
Right.
But in the end, it just expresses how limitless it actually
It
is.
is.
How many times have we heard, it's unconstitutional, you can't do that, but then it's done anyway.
Right.
Because it's limited. What are you going to do?
Right.
Power tends toward a particular vector. It
Mhm.
acts in a particular way.
Mhm.
There's nothing you can do that can limit
Right.
that. But
keep it going.
let's
All
just
right.
keep going. So yeah.
Corvus straightened from his reverent pose. My lord. Yes. And Paul thought, here now, here's one who may harbor secret sympathies for imagined rule of law. We could begin with a religious constitution, Corvus said. Something for the faithful who. No, Paul snapped. We will make this an order in council. Are you recording this, Ireland? Yes, my lord, Ireland said, voice frigid with dislike for the menial role he forced upon her. Constitutions become the ultimate tyranny, Paul said. Their organized power on such a scale as to be overwhelming. The Constitution is social power mobilized, and it has no conscience. It can crush the highest and the lowest, removing all dignity and individuality. It has an unstable balance point and no limitations. I, however, have limitations. In my desire to provide an ultimate protection for my people, I forbid a constitution, order in council, this date, etc., etc. What are the Ixian concerned about the tax, my lord? Stilgar asked. Paul forced his attention away from the brooding, angry look on Corber's face, said, You've a proposal still? We must have control of taxes, our price to the guild for my signature on the two-power treaty, Paul said, is a submission of the Ireland Confederacy to our tax. The Confederacy cannot trade without guild transport. They'll pay. Very good, my lord. Stilgar produced another folder, cleared his throat.
So yeah, that's the part that we talk about many times about the Constitution. Because just everything about that is just absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, there's nothing you can say
Say it,
against
right.
it. Is that, like I said earlier, you create this thing to limit your power, to try to express some type of limitation. But in and of itself, it tends toward the limitless because it becomes a callous thing. It's a thing of social power, social movement meant to guide a people in the way people deal with one another. And when that loses any type of personality or individuality,
Right.
as he says, when that loses touch with the people, it becomes tyranny. It limits a people down to a particular action, toward a particular pattern on what things are supposed to be. It becomes the ultimate tyranny. It cannot move with people because it's limiting social action. And in and of itself creates a limitless power base for its own continuation. Like I've said before, that a government has to choose between its people and itself, and it always chooses itself. This is codified in a document that doesn't actually limit the governmental power, but does limit societal action and the things that people can do in relation to themselves and to others.
Right.
So it becomes a thing of tyranny. It becomes a chain meant to constrain individual and societal action to a particular pattern, one that allows for the continuation of the governmental status and power base. So the what is it? The Itzians, who are the technological masters of the Imperium, they want something that is codified.
Right.
They want something that is going to be able to provide them with a limitless vector for their own power. But Paul will not give it to
That's
them.
right.
You will be subject to the limitations of Paul Muad'Dib.
Right.
And to the wants of my people.
That's right.
And of my sake.
And
that
you will
is
pay
the
this
limitation.
tax. You will.
If you want me to sign this treaty,
Right.
you're going to
yes.
You're going to pay these taxes. And if you don't, then you're going to be cut out of the deal
altogether.
So that's how he's going to go about business. and he bans no
Constitutions.
constitutions because constitutions they are both too weak and too
That's
powerful.
right. They're always on the end of the
They
extremes.
always end up serving the people who
People.
wrote it.
I know that sounds familiar, but I'm going to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
The Quizzerat's report on Seleucus Secundus. Irulan's father has been putting his legions through landing maneuvers. Irulan found something of interest in the palm of her left hand. A pulse thrived at her neck. Irulan, Paul asked, do you persist in arguing that your father's one legion is nothing more than a toy? What could he do with only one legion? She asked. She stared at him out of slitted eyes. He could get himself killed, Chinese said. Paul nodded. And I'll be to blame. I know a few commanders in the jihad, Aaliyah said, who pounce if they learned of this. But it's only his police force, Arla protested. Then they have no need for landing maneuvers, Paul said. I suggest that your next little note to your father contain a frank and direct discussion of my views about this delicate position. She lowered her gaze. Yes, my lord. I hope that would be the end of it. My father would make a good martyr. Paul said. My sister wouldn't send a message to those commanders she mentioned unless I ordered it. An attack on my father carries others, dangers other than the obvious military ones, Ardalan said. People are beginning to look back on his reign with a certain nostalgia. You'll go too far one day, Chadi said in her deadly serious Friedman voice. Enough, Paul ordered. He weighed Ireland's revelation about public nostalgia. Now, that carried a note of truth. Once more, Ireland had proven her worth. The Bene Gesserit sent a formal supplication, Stilgar said, presenting another folder. They wish to consult you about the preservation of your bloodline.
Mm-hmm.
Chani glanced sideways at the folder as though it contained a deadly device. Send the sisterhood the usual excuses, Paul said. Must we? Erland demanded. Perhaps this is the time to discuss it, Chani said. Paul shook his head sharply. They couldn't know that this was part of the price he had not yet decided to pay.
Mm-hmm.
But Chani wasn't to be stopped. I've been to the prayer wall at Sichtebir where I was born, she said. I've submitted to doctors. I've knelt in the desert and sent my thoughts into the depths where dwells Shah-Halad. Yet, she shrugged, nothing avails. Science and superstition, all that failed her, Paul thought. Do I fail her too? By not telling her what bearing and heir to House Atreides will precipitate.
Precipitate.
Yes. He looked up to find an expression of pity in Aaliyah's eyes. The idea of pity from his sister repelled him. Had she, too, seen the terrifying future? My lord must know the dangers to his realm when he has no heir, Ireland said, using her Bene Gesserit powers of voice with an oily persuasiveness. These things are naturally difficult to discuss, but they must be brought into the open. An emperor is more than a man. His figure leads the realm. Should he die without an heir, civil strife must follow. As you love your people, you cannot leave them thus. Paul pushed himself away from the table, strolled to the balcony windows. A wind was flattering the smoke of the city's fires out there. The sky presented a darkening silver blue softened by the evening fall of dust from the shield wall. He stared southward at the encampment which protected his northern lands from the Coriolis winds, and he considered why his own peace of mind could not find no such shield. The council sat silently waiting behind him, aware of how close to rage he was. Paul sensed time rushing upon him. He tried to force himself into a tranquillity of many balances where he might shape a new future. Disengage, 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 he thought. What would happen if he took Chani, just picked up and left with her, sought sanctuary on Tupau? His name would remain behind. His jihad will find new and more terrible centers upon which to turn. He'd be blamed for that too. He felt suddenly fearful that in reaching for any new thing he might let fall what was most precious, that even the slightest noise from him might send the universe crashing back, receding until he never could recapture any piece of it. Below him, the square had become the setting of a band of pilgrims in the green and white of the Hajj. They wended their way like a disjointed snake behind a striding Archean guide. They reminded Paul that his reception hall would be packed with supplicants by now. Pilgrims! Their exercise in homelessness had become a disgusting source of wealth for his imperium. The Hajj filled the spaceways with religious tramps. They came and they came and they came. How did I set this in motion? He asked himself. It had, of course, set itself in motion. It was in the genes which might labor for centuries to achieve this brief spasm. Driven by their deepest religious instinct, the people came, seeking their resurrection. The pilgrimage ended here. Arrakis, the place of rebirth, the place to die. Snide old Freeman said he wanted the pilgrims for their water. What was it the pilgrims really sought? Paul wondered. They said they came to a holy place, but they must know the universe contained no eating source, no too power for the soul. They called Arrakis the place of the unknown where all mysteries were explained. This was a link between their universe and the next. And the frightening thing was that they appeared to go away satisfied. What did they find here? Paul asked himself. Often in their religious ecstasy, they filled the streets with screeching like some old like some odd aviary. In fact, the freemen called them passage birds, and the few who died were winged souls. With a sigh, Paul thought how each new planet his legion subjugated opened new sources of pilgrims. They came out of gratitude for the peace of Muad'Dib. Everywhere there is peace, Paul thought. Everywhere, except in the heart of Muad'Dib.
Hmm.
He felt that some element of himself lay immersed in frosty hoar darkness without end. His prescient power had tampered with the image of the universe held by all mankind. He had shaken the safe cosmos and replaced security with his jihad. He had outfought and outthought and outpredicted the universe of men. But a certainty filled him that this universe still eluded him. This planet beneath him, which he had commanded be remade from desert into a water-rich paradise, it was alive. It had a pulse as dynamic as that of any human. It fought him, resisted, slipped away from his commands. A hand crept into Paul's. He looked down to see Chani peering up at him, concern in her eyes. Those eyes drank him, and she whispered, "Please, love, do not battle with yourself. Do not battle with your raw self." Rousseau. An outpouring of emotion swept upward from her hand, buoyed him. "Sahaya," he whispered. "We must go to the desert soon," she said in a low voice. He squeezed her hand, released it, returned to the table where he remained standing. Shani took her seat. Arla stared at the papers in front of Stilgar, her mouth a tight line. Irulan proposes herself as mother of the imperial heir, Paul said. He glanced at Chinese, back to Ireland, who refused to meet his gaze. "We all know she holds no love for me." Ireland went very still. "I know the political arguments," Paul said. "It's the human arguments which concern me. I think if the princess consort were not bound by the commands of the Bene Gesserit, if she did not seek this out of desires for personal power, my reactions might be very different. As matter stands, though, I reject this proposal." Ireland took a deep, shaky breath. Paul, resuming his seat, thought he had never seen her under such poor control. Leaning toward her, he said, "Ireland, I am truly sorry." She lifted her chin, a look of pure fury in her eyes. I don't want your pity, she hissed, and turned to Stilgar. Is there more that's urgent and dire? Holding his gaze firmly on Paul, Stilgar said, one more matter, my lord. The guild again proposes a formal embassy here on Arrakis. One of the deep space kind, Corbett asked. His voice full of effect. I'm sorry, full of fanatic loathing. Presumably, Stilgar said. A matter to be considered with the utmost care, my lord, Corbo warned. The Council of Naibs would not like it. An actual guildsman here on Arrakis? They contaminate the very ground they touch. They live in tanks and don't touch the ground, Paul said, letting his voice reveal irritation. The Naibs might take matters into their own hands, my lord, Corbin said. Paul glared at him. They are freemen after all, my lord, Corbin insisted. We will remember how the guild brought those who opposed us. We have not forgotten the way they blackmailed a spice ransom from us to keep our secret from our enemies. They drained us of every... Enough, Paul snapped. Do you think I have forgotten? As though he had just awakened to the import of his own words, Corbin stuttered unintelligibly. Then, my lord, forgive me. I did not mean to imply you are not free, but I did not. They'll send a steersman, Paul said. It isn't likely a steersman would come here if he could see danger in it. Her mouth dry with sudden fear, Arla said. You've seen a steersman come here? Of course I haven't seen a steersman, Paul said, mimicking her tone. But I can see where one's been and where one's going. Let them send us a steersman. Perhaps I have use for such a one. So ordered, Stilgar said. And Arline, hiding a smile behind her hand, thought, it's true then. Our emperor cannot see a steersman. They are mutually blind. The conspiracy is hidden.
You're so stupid. But yeah, I said so after the whole Constitution part, and they bring up the idea of of uh of Irulan having the imperial heir.
Mm-hmm.
Paul is so upset
Mm-hmm.
because we actually begin to learn the details of Chani's death. That it involves her having a child.
Right.
That she dies,
Mm-hmm.
providing Paul an heir, and that's why he's so reluctant.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm pretty sure Paul knows about the contraceptives and all that stuff. I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure he's able to put it together.
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't want. He loves Chani so much he doesn't want to give her up, and he knows that if she bears him an heir, and she's the only one who will,
Right.
that she's going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And he does not want to pay this price, and he thinks, is he hurting Chani by not telling her what he knows?
Right.
And he gets so upset, and he just has to take a breath, and he is like, what if I just take Chani and go?
Yeah.
But he knows, like he said, it's going to make things worse, because if Paul isn't there, then all we have is Corbo.
Right.
And the people like him. They said they're going to find other symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to find other things. And Corba and people like him, they're the ones who are going to fill that gap.
Right.
And they're not the ones you want
Right.
to be in charge of the
Mm-hmm.
jihad. Because we learned, like he said in the chapter, he talks about how his visions have revealed to him things worse than what's happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
And things could be considerably worse. But it's only through Paul's influence.
Right.
That things are not as bad as they could be. That's him. And if he just takes Chani and runs, then that's going to unleash something even worse. Like I said, it'll be a brief spasm.
Right.
In eternity, in the history of all things.
Right.
But it'll be a hell that we have to live through. And it will be one unlike anything.
Right.
That's going to open the pathway to even worse things. So he knows he has to stay. He knows what he has to do. He knows if he leaves, it's going to just make it worse. And that's why he looks at Irulan and says that maybe if you actually care about me as a person. Because you can say what you want about Paul. He does care about Irulan. And he is very sad for her that she has to play this role and that she's never going to get what she's looking for from him. But all Irulan is thinking about is mothering the
Right.
a new house, a new line.
Right.
Like, if you actually cared about me, then
maybe.
If you weren't just a spy for the Bene Gesserit, if you weren't just looking at this from a purely materialistic, statistical point of view, then maybe I could harbor some emotion for you, and maybe I could even justify it.
Right.
But as it stands now,
no.
as it stands forever,
right?
No, that's not how this one is going to be. And Irulan just so
upset
by this, and Paul is sorrowful, but she's like, I don't want your pity.
He's like,
and all right, fine,
no, fine,
it's fine. That's just how it is going to be. Then,
right?
Fine. And then that's when Paul asks, Stilgar, is there anything else? And he hears about the steersman. And Korba goes on and on. There's like a deep world emphasis, right? Like not on. They mean out there, not here, not here, right? And then Paul is like, oh man. Like, but they did all these things,
right?
Like, I know what they did. Right. Fine, they're here. I don't want to hear about them,
right?
Right. And then he like, maybe a guild steersman may be of some use. And then Irulan is like, what you mean? Have you seen? What you mean? Have I seen?
Yeah.
I mean, no, I haven't seen.
Right.
But yes, but I can see where they're going.
Right.
I can see where they've been. And you're like, the conspiracy is still. It's like. This is the thing that I guess.
See, that's why.
We learn later on. We learn later on. I guess from in the later book series, we understand that I may not see them, but I see the space that they leave.
That's right.
And I can still interpret from that they're trying to hide from me the spaces. I can still,
right.
So they, like you said, if you actively try to. Like I said, in actively trying to find a thing, you may hide yourself. And in actively trying to hide, you kind of reveal yourself. You leave a path. So the truth is so it's true for both of them. But all Irulan hears is, he can't see. No, you completely missed the point.
Right.
But yeah, that was that part.
Yeah.
And that's the part that I think, because it just lets you know what's going on in this book. Like we said, there's just so much going on. In this one chapter, you learn about his prescient vision, and you get this somewhat eternalist view of time that he exists in. And then you hear about the constitutions and how we've talked about that many a times, about you in trying to limit, you create limitless. That these contradictions are somewhat emblematic of what Paul is and what he represents, and how he has become so disillusioned, but he has to stay, because if he leaves, everything gets considerably worse. And he doesn't want to give up Chani. And maybe Aaliyah has some awareness of that, some awareness of it, because there's this look of pity in Aaliyah. So maybe she has some awareness of it. But at the end, Paul is just like, fine, let the guild still in here, and that's it. So yeah, so that's that chapter. And after that chapter, is when hate. When Edric comes, he presents Paul with hate. With the Duncan, Idaho Gula.
Right.
Right. And Paul is taken aback, for one, by this, and the Gula has the metal eyes. That and then he's somewhat disquieted by this, and he's a younger version of himself. They gave him back his youth. So he's young. He's in the prime of his life. And Paul questions him, and is like, "What do you, what do you remember?" And like, I don't remember much. I remember impressions of it. I remember like places and foods and stuff, but I don't really have a concrete memory of who I was. And his favorite thing, he says, is watching people try to place him, try to remember him, watching his presence, and having how people react to that, to who he was. And seeing that interplay is one of his favorite. And he's a Zinsuni Mentat. He's been trained as a Zinsuni Mentat. Hate. Duncan, Idaho, the Gula.
Right.
And Zinsuni is just a combination of Zen Buddhism and Sunni Islam. Right. So he's a Zinsuni Mentat, and he has all these ways of phrasing things that puts Paul off. At least throws him off balance. And we know what the thing is, that hate is there to infect Paul's psyche,
Mm-hmm.
to enlarge his moral compass and depress him
Right, to the point to
to a
where
point of
he
suicide.
right.
You know, and him being a Zensun Mintat, being able to play these word games with Paul is another vector for that. And he he acts like and he acts like what was your purpose here?
Mm-hmm.
And then
Basically,
and
he
like
said,
and like is alluded to in that
"I'm here to destroy
hate.
you." Right,
Yes, I'm here to kill you. I'm here to
right.
destroy you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's alluded to earlier in the book. And Paul is taken aback by his candor, by his
Mm-hmm.
honesty. You know that he's making no attempt to hide. And he says, "So
Mm-hmm.
what? How do you think I should defend myself against you?"
Mm-hmm.
And in the most sincere,
Mm-hmm.
the most Duncan Idaho voice that he can possibly muster, he says, "Send me away."
Yep.
And at that moment, Paul is like,
Right.
I can't send you away. I can't.
Mm-hmm.
There's demand. Your visage has demand, makes demands of my flesh.
Right.
I cannot
Right.
send you
No
away.
way. And Aaliyah is smitten by
And
this.
Leah is in her. All the Reverend mothers have
Yeah.
these little hidey holes and
Right.
stuff that they can look into. And the entire time throughout his
This conversation.
conversation with Hate, he's like, "Man, I wish Aaliyah was here to offer me some type of counsel and stuff."
Mm-hmm.
And but Aaliyah is watching,
Right.
and she's like, "I don't know what type of
Yeah,
counsel I'm
you
going
don't
to
know
give
this one,
you
dude.
because this is a weapon meant for both of us." And
Right.
she finds herself attracted to because this is the first time that she is
She's
actually
right.
meeting Duncan,
Duncan,
Idaho.
Idaho. Mm-hmm.
She has memories of him,
Mm-hmm.
but Duncan was dead
Right. When she
before she was even born.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so and she's taken aback by this man, and of
Mm-hmm.
course, you know, it takes an extraordinary man for
Yeah, for to even
to get her attention.
right.
So yeah, but Paul is like, I recognize that you are bait.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and there have been many fish that have been able to escape the
Right.
trap. So maybe I'll be able to escape
this
this
one. Mm-hmm.
because I can't deny you.
Mm-hmm.
I can't send you away.
And that's a message within itself.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think about this entire series.
Yeah, and that
Messages.
goes back to that Paul is a water carrier.
Mm-hmm.
He's an Aquarius in a sense. He's a
Mm-hmm.
water bearer.
Mm-hmm.
He's meant to wash things clean, make things new. And water in and of itself, like we've said many
Mm-hmm.
times before, is he's terraforming Dune. He's
Right.
bringing Dune.
Mm-hmm.
And he's bringing water to
Mm-hmm.
Arrakis, and water is a chaos. Is indicative of chaos.
Yeah, because
of the primordial
mm-hmm.
feminine energy,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what he represents in a sense. He's a fish.
Right.
He's a fish man, much
mm-hmm.
like Edric, but
mm-hmm.
in a much more philosophical sense of
right.
the word. And he knows that there's bait in the water for him,
mm-hmm.
and he's trying his best to. He's able to elude many of them, but this particular trap, Hate, Duncan, Idaho,
mm-hmm.
he cannot deny.
Right.
And this is a trap also for Aaliyah,
mm-hmm.
who's like, I can't deny him, but that's a different.
Right.
It's a different.
And I think there's a message in that is that
mm-hmm.
How is it that you can't deny? Well, denial in itself will bring about a whole nother different set of parameters that
mm-hmm.
you're not really ready to deal with. And I think about, of course, I think about us, is that we can't deny what's in front of us. And trying to deny that, it
leads to other things.
Right.
It can exacerbate an issue more than it can solve one.
Mm-hmm.
But the first step of escaping a trap is recognizing that you are
in a trap. Mm-hmm.
That's Stuffer Hyward from the first book.
Right.
And he recalls that.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe he's going to be able to survive hate because
mm-hmm.
he can't deny.
Right. See?
Yep.
See? Message there.
There's a message.
There's a message there.
Right. So yeah.
And
the very final chapter we read is because Edric did not come to this planet, did not come to Arrakis alone.
Right.
He brought
Reverend Mother
Gaius Helen Mahane,
mm-hmm.
who's been banned from ever stepping foot
right.
on Arrakis.
That's right.
The entire time she's like, I'm just passing through. I'm not going to Arrakis.
Right.
This liner,
right.
I need to go somewhere else. But but then the person who was sent to collect her was like, it's been prophecy. This comes from on high. Like God is waiting. And that's when she's like, oh man, this is from Paul himself. Right. Mm-hmm. And she's like, oh, Jesus Christ. Because she knows she's going to die and this is it for her.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh man. And she says the litany against fear to still herself from what may be coming. And she's like, this may be it for me.
Yeah.
and she's visited by the Princess Irulan,
Yes.
and they're carrying on this very banal conversation, but the real conversation they're having with their hands. They're giving these hand signals
Right.
toward each other, and um, Reverend Gaius Helen Mahame is like, of course, because she's at the end of her life, and she feels like this is it.
Right.
So all the braces are off, and she's like, "Of course you failed.
Yeah.
Of course you failed to bring in Paul because you're just a screaming, complaining shrew
Right.
who prefers actions over words.
Right.
Like you're beautiful,
But
you're just so indignant.
Right.
Of course you didn't.
Of course you fail. Right.
Of course you failed. Okay, here's the new parameters.
Right.
Right. Here's the new plan.
Right.
We need to preserve Paul's bloodline.
Right.
If you ain't the one, then Aaliyah is.
Right.
So you are going to need to breed them two.
Right.
Brother and sister.
Right. Because there's no way that Chinese. There's no way.
We cannot allow those wild Freeman blood. Right. Because Paul's genealogy has been curated through thousands of years.
Right.
He's the product of their,
of their breeding
program.
Right.
And they don't want, and so is Aaliyah, and they don't want that blood to go to waste.
Right.
So like, throw them together, and if you have to, kill Chani.
Right.
Kill Chani. If she gets pregnant, abort it.
Right.
Do whatever, even if that means you have to die.
Right.
She cannot bear him an heir, and you are going to need to find a way to bring
get Paul and Leah together to have a child. Right.
And Leah together, and Irulan is taken aback. She's like, "No, I can still do it." And you're like, "No, it's the new plan."
Yeah, it's a new plan.
But she takes it like a true Reverend Mother. It's like, "All right, I'm going to do my bit." And Gaius Helen Mahame has the new Dune Tarot, and it's showing her that Paul may have secret resources, that this plan may not go, it may not go to plan, and she's so frustrated she kind of throws it all aside,
right?
And that's where we ended.
Yeah, she's just so disgusted.
She's so disgusted with Irulan,
right?
She's kind of disgusted with herself, and she thinks that she's been set up by the guild,
right?
Because Paul isn't even supposed to know,
right?
But so she's like, this might be a setup. Like, oh, this is it for me, and I'm gotta deal with this, with her, this failure, of course. And so
pretty for nothing.
so now Chani's life is in true danger.
Yes.
Right. And we understand what the full vector is between them. But yeah. So that was what we read. So in conclusion, to conclude our part, I think the meatiest and the most philosophically relevant part is the council meeting and learning how all like we said before, all of this is a scam. All of this is a scam. Things aren't better under Paul,
right?
But it's just not what it could be without him. And the fact that, like he says, all these people are giving up all their lives for him, it's become a means of inconsiderable wealth for him. And all of this is just a rebrand of a same old song, the same old dance again and again. And all he wants is to just leave it all behind with the woman that he loves. He just wants to disappear from, but he can't. He has to give her up to save the entirety of everyone. Because he is everyone. He's Quetzal's Haderach. He is all of us. And the one way that he's going to, end this jihad, and make it into something else is he's going to have to give up the person that he loves. And he's surrounded by people who just don't understand. Aaliyah may be the only one approaching where he is, but no one understands. But he's going to have to pay it. And like we said, this is how power fails. Corba wants to be. He wishes he could be Paul, but he just doesn't understand. And Stilgar is just clinging on to to the actual to winning, to victory, to these things, to names on treaties and flying banners, and that's what he's clinging on to, and he doesn't understand. No one understands what's truly at stake here. No one but Paul. And like I said, everyone finds peace on Arrakis but Paul. And he's the one who's meant to bring all this change, and it costs him so much. I said, this is how power fails. This is what happens when it's up to one person. This is how this is the fallacy of leadership. So yeah, if you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments, and thank you for hearing us out.
Thank you so much.